Hi, this is Aaron Newcomb, and on this episode of Floss Weekly, Randy Harper joins me to talk about CakePHP, a web framework built on PHP, obviously, which allows you to build websites and applications without any muss, any fuss, takes a lot of the headache out of it. So that's all coming up right now on Floss Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Aaron Newcomb and Randy Harper, episode 244, recorded on March 6, 2013. CakePHP. Hi, and welcome to this edition of Floss Weekly. I'm Aaron Newcomb, and I'm joined this week by a truly lovely co-host. We've been saying that lately about myself and other non-lovely co-hosts, but we actually have a lovely co-host on today, and that's Randy Harper. Randy, how's it going?
Aw, it's going really well. I'm actually back here for the second time in about a month, I think, which is extremely rare because before that I hadn't been on for like a year. So I'm so happy to be back, and hopefully I'll be on some more to come.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're always glad to have you because you always bring some different insights. I mean, I think all of the co-hosts that are on, kind of have their own perspective on things, and so it's actually very interesting to listen and see what the co-hosts bring up, because we all come from different backgrounds and different views on open source and projects. So it's really interesting to hear different people's opinions. So it's really good to have you here for this show. And in this show, of course, Randall's not here. We should mention that he is on I don't know if he's on a cruise or a tour or something. He's in South America somewhere. Last time I was on, I said he was petting turtles. I hope that he actually did pet a turtle, and we have a picture of that we can show you for next week when Randall comes back. Maybe we'll entitle that episode "Petting Turtles," so Randall can show us all his pictures of turtles. But anyway, he's gone, and I pulled the short straw, so I'm here today as your host, and we're going to be talking about CakePHP. Now, CakePHP is a project that kind of aims to make a PHP framework that's simple to use, easy to use, not quite so much trouble from what I gather from reading the website. So we're going to be talking with the developer here in just a minute about CakePHP. I hope that in some way here that it involves actual cake. That would be the cool thing, is if there was actually some real cake involved here somewhere. But Randy, do you know much about CakePHP?
See, you're tempting me here because the one joke I don't want to make is the cake is a lie. And now I just made it. So
well, any Portal fans will know that line and appreciate that. So we won't bring that up because I'm sure he gets that all the time, right? So
yeah,
we'll try not to bring that up. But have you heard of the project, or are you familiar with it? Do you use PHP?
I actually haven't done much with CMSs and stuff like CakePHP before, so this is kind of a crash course for this type of thing for me. It looks really cool though, and I was looking through the documentation, and it looks really easy to get into. So I might end up playing around with it a little bit after this.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm kind of excited about it. I do run Drupal server at home for my website, which I haven't upgraded in forever. In fact, anyone out there that wants to help me get my web server back in shape, please let me know. I'd love to have your help because I just don't have time to deal with it. So actually, this is a really good topic for me. How do you make these PHP frameworks easier to use? I think I would love to know, coming from a Drupal background and upgrade nightmare experience, I'd love to know how to make this thing work a little bit better. So looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guest. Mark Story, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself and explain to us at a high level what CakePHP is all about.
Sure. I'm a web developer. I live in Toronto in Canada. I've been doing web development for almost 10 years, probably 8 to 10 years now. I've been working on CakePHP for about 6. And so what CakePHP is it's a rapid application development framework for PHP. So similar in style and kind of approach towards Rails and Django. And it's a framework to help PHP developers build web applications quickly and with less code, hopefully.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because there's a lot of frameworks. I mean, we have probably a good third of our shows, I think, have been about frameworks. So, I mean, we talk about it a lot. So explain to us what's different about this framework. And I think you just touched on it a little bit there about what you're trying to do. But what makes this framework different from other frameworks that people might use?
Yep. So the good part of it is kind of conventions over configuration, which is an idea we borrowed from the project's borrowed from Rails. So instead of having lots of configuration files, you name your files a certain way. Those map, so if you name a class post, the database table for that model class will be posts, and there's conventions around how foreign keys are done and how primary keys are done, and where template files go for specific controller actions. So it's an MVC framework, and so controller files have a naming convention between the file name and the class name, so you don't have to configure all of that. And then one of the other advantages is there's a really good scaffolding component. So if you don't want to write any code, the framework will use the conventions and kind of do like a computer guess at what your pages should look like and what kind of an interface you could get. So it'll generate all of that for you. There's a lot of code generation tools, so you can generate scaffold applications really, really quickly, like in about 5 minutes. You can generate a basic CRUD web app.
A basic CRUD web app?
Yeah, so like it does your create, your reads, your updates. You get like a paginated list. You can look at single pages.
So it's not like a crummy web app. You're not saying it's a bad web app or a cruddy web app. It's actually an acronym. Okay, good.
Yeah. So the create, read, update, delete, and it looks okay. It looks okay. It's not the best designed interface in the world, and that's kind of intentional so that you're forced to actually finish it off. And it comes with built-in stuff for building unit tests and building database fixtures and database abstraction libraries. So a lot of those common types of things that people are going to need in most of their applications.
Yeah.
I don't know if that explains the differentiating factors, but.
I think
so a lot of it.
I think it gets there. So I mean, so let's keep it still at a high level before we get into the specifics. Like, what would I use CakePHP for? Why would I want to use CakePHP? What kind of applications? Obviously, they're web apps, right? But what would I go to? Would I run my blog on CakePHP, or would I build a web store front on CakePHP? What would I do with it?
Yeah, you could do both of those things. So the frameworks are generally targeted towards people who have outgrown their CMS or like traditional CMS systems. So if you've used Drupal, but you need to build a whole bunch of custom application code, and you can't really figure out how to do it in Drupal, it might be easier to do in a framework like Cake. And so it's used for a lot of things, actually. It's used for small blogs. It's used for online stores. It's used for small, not small, but like basically web applications. So the add-ons store for the Mozilla add-ons at one point in time was built in Cake. The oatmeal.com is a fairly prolific Cake site. There's other sites like, I'm trying to think, Mocha, Live Mocha is another one I think is built in Cake. So it's a English learning site. I've built education sites, social networking sites. Yeah, those are the types of things. You can use it to build kind of anything, similar to Rails.
Right.
But you're building it in PHP instead of in Ruby.
Right. And what about performance? What about, I mean, obviously you've said that one of the goals is to simplify things and make it so you write less code and things.
Yep.
But does that have any impact on performance, or how do you keep performance high?
Lots of profiling. Lots of profiling. We've made Cake progressively faster in the past couple of releases, so it had not so good performance in the 1.x series, and then we released, like 2 years ago, we released the 2x series, and so that's had much better performance. We removed a lot of features. A lot of times in the past, features were built to too much magic, was a line we found. You can take that conventions over configuration way too far, and you end up in the too much magic land. And we stripped out a lot of that too much magic and made it back to like more based on ground conventions and giving people more explicit control over things, and that helps performance a lot. It's obviously not going to be the fastest framework, but it's as fast as it can be based on what it does. It's obviously not the slowest framework either. Yeah, performance is always a tough thing. People always bring up scalability as well, but it's PHP, so it scales like most PHP does.
Yeah. So what brought you to do? I mean, what was the problem that you were trying to solve? What kind of got you started down this route?
I was working at my first real web job, and we had to build, we had to transform a paper-based system that was, this company collects financial data for all the nonprofit or arts organizations in Canada. And then what they do is they present financial data like in aggregate back to the non-for-profit art organizations. So they can say these galleries of this size make this much money. They spend this much on, staff and expenses. And so it's a big, long survey, and it used to be a paper survey. And then people would scan it, fax it in. Someone would data entry it into an Access database. That Access database would get FTP'd to somewhere, and then someone would do something. So we're replacing that whole crazy system with a web-based system. So that's what I was building, and obviously a CMS isn't going to work. And so I looked for frameworks, and Cake was the one I could get set up in about 10 minutes. So that was the one I chose. Sadly. That's how technical decisions get made.
Well, I mean, sometimes that's true. I mean, I've been involved in those too. Sometimes you just go with, you have an urgency, some sort of thing you got to get done right away, and it's like, well, I'd really like to compile this code and build this application from scratch, but you know what? I'm just gonna apt-get install because I don't have time to mess with it.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the differentiating factors of Cake is that when you download the framework, there's not, like you just unzip the package or you clone the Git repo and it's already working. And it has instructions on these are the things you need to do. You need to set up your database. You need to set up your caching. And once you do all these things, then you're ready. Whereas other frameworks, you have to run a whole bunch of command line tools and kind of before you can even get started. So it's fairly user-friendly in that regard.
So let's just go back up and go over that, because that was going to be my nice segue, by the way. That was going to be my next question is how do you get started in this? So you said you download the package, but then there are some dependencies as well, right? So
there are no external dependencies. The only external dependency we have is for PHP unit, and that's if you want to write automated unit tests. Okay. And so when you download the package, it's all one giant blob of code. So yeah, you either can download a zip file or clone the Git repo, and you're ready to go.
Okay, but in terms of dependencies on other applications like databases and things like that, I would still have to set those up, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you'll also need like a web server for sure.
Right.
And you might need a database server depending if your application needs to talk to a database server.
Right. Right. So I set up Apache. I set up MySQL or MariaDB or Postgres. Are there any particular web servers or databases that you prefer or that work or don't work?
So the ones pardon?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the ones we test the most extensively with are Nginx and PHP-FPM, Apache, and IIS. So if you're on Windows, we support IIS. People have also got it set up inside Cherokee, Light HTTP, and a whole bunch of other web servers. For databases, we test with, we have a CI server that runs MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, and then I do manual testing. I open up a Windows VM and run tests against SQL Server. So those are the four primary relational databases we support. And then there's community plugins for supporting stuff like MongoDB and React and CouchDB and a bunch of others. Non-relational database services.
So we just got a question off of IRC. Someone asked, does CakePHP have a way of templating that supports responsive design like Bootstrap?
No, it doesn't come with one built in, but there probably are. You can use Bootstrap because Cake doesn't actually make any decisions about your templating. It just uses basic PHP templates. So there are community plugins for switching if you want to use Twig, which is a templating language similar to Jinja. You can use that. People have built plugins to support Mustache templates if you prefer that. And then there are actually community plugins for also supporting Bootstrap so that the helper system in Cake will actually output all the HTML that works with Bootstrap.
Also asked about converting PSD designs into usable UI.
That's going to be a by hand process. Yeah. I've yet to see a magic system that can take PSD files and output web apps. A lot of people will be out of a job when that happens. There's a niche market for someone to turn into a bazillion-dollar business.
Yeah, I mean, because most people have to do this by hand, right? I mean, you go edit the CSS to get it to look like whatever whatever you started with. I mean, you kind of have to say, oh yeah, that was a little bit more over here. So you go to the CSS, you make a, you move things over or adjust things or whatever. So it's almost like translating between two different languages.
Yeah,
really.
Totally.
You start with a design that looks a certain way, and you say, okay, how do I make it look just like that, but in CSS?
Yeah, but on a web browser. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of difficult.
Thankfully, that's gotten a lot easier.
Well, I guess so. That's one way to look at it. Yeah, since back in the day. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was just thinking of. Like when I first started out doing web page, I actually ran a little company for a while designing web pages. Not successful at all. I think I had two clients, but it was just something to do. And so, yeah, exactly. I mean, I wasn't even using CSS back then, right? I mean, I was using HTML, almost strictly HTML with like background images and things like that.
There probably was no CSS.
I don't know if there was. I mean, if it was in its infancy at that point, because this was literally probably 12, 14 years ago. So yeah. So it was very difficult back then. Now you've got lots of little tweaks and knobs and things you can do to make things look pretty. But enough about CSS. We're talking about PHP. Where did the name CakePHP come from, or what's the linkage there?
So I wasn't around when the project got started. I've been told that it's easy as cake. And then the logo also has the 3 layers. It's a 3-layer cake for the 3 layers in the framework, the model, view, and controller. So that's a double weird reference.
Right. Well, talk about that then. Talk about the 3 layers and how they interact.
Sure. So Cake is a traditional model view controller framework similar to Rails and Django and Catalyst and Symfony and Zend. And so the 3 layers are your controller, which accepts HTTP requests, and then it turns the information in a request into model calls. So it'll say, look up all the articles that were authored by John. And so the request data will have, username like authored by John. The controller will take that information out, delegate that to a model, and say, get me all the posts written by John. It will return that data, and then the controller will pass that data into the view, and then the view will take the data that was passed down and convert it into HTML or JSON or XML, whatever the client requested.
And I want to make sure we differentiate, if needed, as well. I mean, this is really different than a CMS, or I mean, it's not Drupal, right? I mean, we're not talking about Drupal. We're talking about writing applications that run, and the output is probably in a web format, right? But I mean, it's not. So that's kind of what I was asking earlier. Is like, would I use this to do my blog? I think the answer is probably not, right? You could use it. You could use. There are actually CMSs built in Cake, which is an interesting thing. There's a somewhat popular CMS called Krugo, and it's written in Cake. So it's a CMS built on top of a framework. So the frameworks are often like a lower level than a CMS. Right. I just wanted to differentiate that a little bit to kind of make sure we set the stage. Some of the interesting things, I mean, you add a lot of hooks, if you will, or you kind of give people what they need so they don't have to go do it. I'm thinking things like translations. I think you have some translation services built in. What other services are built into the framework? So translations is a big one. That's one of for a long time, many frameworks didn't offer translations. So we'd have a full IATN and L10N. So you can do language-based translations. You can also do locale-based translations. And then there's also time formatting and number formatting based on the current locale. The number formatting is not 100%, but the time formatting is quite good. And so there's those. There's stuff like pagination that happens in every single web application. So there's built-in things for paginating over a query and then generating all the little links, the number links and the back and forth links and sort links. So that's all in it. There is stuff for doing like database queries, so doing complex database queries, doing simple database queries, inserting, updating, deleting. Validation is built into it. There's a fairly extensive validation system that lets you validate all kinds of types. You can build your own custom types. We have locale-based validation. So like if you're in the Netherlands, we can validate Dutch postal codes or Belgium postal codes. Yeah,
There's those, scaffolding, which is a kind of a useful one when you're just getting started. So it's a lot of like built-in kind of components. HTML form generation, which is a nightmare in web applications, like generating forms, taking the request data, populating the inputs, putting validation error messages, making sure the right checkboxes are selected, that kind of stuff.
And you do that. How do you handle that? I mean, because I've dealt with that too in the past, writing Perl scripts or Python scripts, and trying to work with forms is always a problem. Then you got to pass data back and forth. And how does PHP or how does CakePHP handle that differently, or what does it do to help with that?
So what we do is we provide a fairly useful class called the form helper, and it's available in the views. And so what you can do is you can just do form input, which is the name of the method, and then you give it a database, like the model and the column. And then what it can do is it can infer based on the model and the column. It can look up the model and then do type introspection on the column and say that this is a number column, so I'm going to make an HTML5 number input. And then it also has access to the request data, which gets passed down into the view. And so it can say, for this model and this column, do I have any request data? And then it can pull the request data out and fill the value attribute. And then it can also say, well, with this model, were there any validation errors for this field? And if there are, then it can, apply the CSS classes and include the validation error messages. So it's kind of ties back to the convention system that based on the model name, we know where the file is, so we can load the file or load the class out of the registry and then process, its attributes and introspect on where the validation errors are, because they're always in the same place. So that's how the form helping system works. The form helper system works. And then it also has like way too many options for generating HTML, like customizing all the little divs and all the little classes, and which ones are selected, which ones are disabled, and that kind of stuff.
Which is a pain, but it's important because I might want to use my forms a completely different way than you do. I mean, it's a highly customizable area of HTML that's important for the transactions in and out. So, so that's actually good. I mean, it is a kind of a pain that there are so many options and things that you have to worry about. But it's a good thing that you allow people to do that, because I've been in some modules, some not frameworks necessarily, but some modules for code that don't allow for all the attributes, and then you're like, well, I really needed to do this. I need to get this information, and if they don't allow for it, then you're stuck. So.
Yep. So we have like multi-layered API inside the form helper. So there's like a method called inputs, which you just give it a model name and it just generates everything based on that, and you get very little control. So if you just want the magic or the conventions-based generation, we have that. We also have one field at a time, and then you can also generate like just the label or just the input or just the validation message. So it's like a multi-layered kind of API, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, definitely. So another question I had is so what's similar to CakePHP? What kind of frameworks are out there that you would say are most similar, or that I don't want to say you compete with necessarily, because it's not. I don't think we're in that kind of a discussion here, right? I mean, it's not like McDonald's versus Burger King, but what are the closest comparisons that you could make? And if I didn't choose CakePHP, what else might I choose?
So other popular frameworks in the PHP space, there's Symfony and Zend, which are the two largest frameworks, both in code base size and user base. They're both I find them far more complicated than Cake. They have way more stuff built in. They're much more heavily kind of oriented around configuration. More towards the same vein as Cake, there's it's not really much else around there. There's Kohana, which is similar. There's Laravel, and then there's a whole bunch of micro frameworks as well. So depending on what your needs are, some people will choose micro frameworks because they want an even smaller application, like smaller frameworks than Cake. And some people will choose like Symfony or Zend because they want a much bigger framework. So a lot of it is based on how much stuff do you want included in your framework, and what do you want your framework to do for you?
Right.
And how much do you want to have to do?
Yeah. And in terms of, so I guess if there was a smaller footprint, then performance might be a concern as well, right? Or either I don't need it to do everything that CakePHP does, or is there also a case that since it's not doing as much or worrying about as much stuff, that it might run faster?
Some people will feel that. You can make micro frameworks that are really slow. You just have to try. So I think a lot of it is also like the developer API that each framework offers, it's going to be different in each case. And so like micro frameworks like Silex and Laravel expose a much simpler end user API. And so some people really appreciate that. Some people want a more like traditional class-based system. So a framework like Cake or Symfony work better in that case.
Do you guys share, obviously you don't share code, but I mean, do you share kind of, do you get along with those guys? I mean, do you talk to them? Or you're like, oh, we could do this, we could all do this better if we just did X, Y, or Z?
Yeah. I've met most of the maintainers from other projects, and we all get along. The community around the projects likes to think that there's this great animosity, but I've met people from every project, and we just sit and have food and go out for beer. There's no actual like hatred, not nearly as much as comes from the community around them.
Yeah.
I don't know where that comes from. I think it's people want to be right, and something has to be the best, and they view it as a zero-sum game. But I don't think it works like that.
So on the topic of community, if people want to get involved and contribute to CakePHP, what are some of the ways they can do this?
There's a lot, actually. The easiest way, there's a bunch of really low friction ways, and then there's some higher friction ways, obviously. The easiest ways to do it are to hop on IRC. We have an IRC channel in Freenode and a Google group, and those are our primary support lines. So we help people figure out their problems, and we just shoot the shit and talk about, the weather wherever people are. And there's people there 24/7, depending on what time zone you want to see people from. You go in at different times. So those are two really easy ways. Contributing to the documentation, we have a couple documentation sites. We have a generated API, and then kind of a community managed documentation, which is just like a cookbook. It's called a cookbook, and it's just kind of how to use the framework, kind of ways to do common idioms and common things with the framework. And so translating is a really easy way to get involved. Submitting spelling fixes and typos, and expanding the documentation where it's lacking is a good way. Filing bugs is a really easy way for people to get started. That's how I got started with the project, was filing bugs and submitting patches for bugs. You can also submit pull requests on GitHub. The code is hosted on GitHub, and we do all of the development through there. And so a lot of new features come in from pull requests from people in the community and from existing contributors.
Okay, I also saw something, and this is something I wanted to bring everyone's attention to because it's such a great thing, and I love seeing it, is the coding standards part under your contributing page.
Yes.
More projects need this, but you want to get into that and explain what that is to people?
Sure. So coding standards are a highly, kind of flammable subject, I guess. Everyone has their own opinion, and everyone is right. And if you're not with the person that you're talking to, they're wrong or you're wrong. And so you can fight about that. And you can fight about tabs and spaces and all kinds of awesome stuff like that. But anyways, coding standards are important because over time, many people work on a project, and the code becomes basically an unreadable mess if you don't have coding standards and you don't follow them. So we have documented guidelines, and we also have an automatic tool. The PHP community has built a tool called PHP CS, or PHP Code Sniffer. And so we have a CakePHP style guide implementation for that. And so you can use this tool to check your code for it as well. And so it's a style guide.
Yeah, the existing code you have, is this all currently under your coding standards, or are you trying to get people to help convert some of it? Because I've seen coding standards come in late in the game, and people have to start converting code at that point, and that can be some wonderful diffs to look through.
Yes, so we've always had coding standards, but they weren't checked. It was more like if you saw it, you fixed it. And so about a year and a half ago, I found out about PHP CS. I wrote up a coding standard for basically taking the online documentation, converting that into code, and then making it runnable. And then we spent about a couple months running it and fixing one file at a time. And so we went from 3,000 errors to 0. And so now we have a Jenkins server that runs it. Every time you do a commit, it runs the coding standards. And I'm a big fan, a big proponent of coding standards. I think you should pick one. I don't think it matters which one you pick, but pick one and stick with it. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's a totally arbitrary choice, but you should pick one, and pick one that most people will agree with. Some people will hate it, and you just stick with it. And that's how things have to be done. Someone has to lay down the law.
The iron fist of coding standards. That's fantastic.
It has to happen. At my day job, we had an application where no one followed a coding standard. And so we have a 350,000 line or 450,000 line application written by 20 different people, everyone doing their own thing. And it was a total disaster. And it took you'd open a file and it was, indented with 2 spaces, but halfway down the file was tabs, and it's just pick something.
So how many contributors do you have writing code for this that are having to adhere to these coding standards?
For Cake, there are over 220 total contributors. There's about 8 people who work on it on a regular basis and hang out in IRC all the time and work on it once a week. And there's people who have 1 patch. There's people who have thousands, and there's about 8 core people, and then there's around 250 contributors in total. And then the documentation has a couple hundred contributors as well. Some of them are different people than from the code, and yeah.
Nice. Do you have localization teams doing documentation for different languages, or is that something you're looking for?
No, we're always looking for more. We have Japanese, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian. And I'm probably forgetting one, started. Japanese and French are done because those communities are fantastic. The German, Spanish, and Portuguese ones are halfway done. And Russian is not very much done, but there's some, so it's better than none.
It sounds like there's a lot of work happening here with a lot of people involved. I mean, is anyone getting paid for this, or is it all strictly off of a volunteer basis?
It's pretty much all volunteer. That's one of the other interesting parts about Cake, compared to most other PHP frameworks, is both Zend and Symfony and Laravel have corporate interests in the framework. CakePHP is entirely run by volunteers. So we actually run on free hardware, generously donated to us by Rackspace. And everything we do is borrowed. Our ticket tracker is provided by Lighthouse for free. Code is hosted on GitHub. Yeah. It's all free.
It's awesome.
I mean, it is awesome, but at the same time, I mean, it seems like, I'm sure that it would be nice for people that have spent all this time working on it to be able to get some money, maybe through support or, paid support, things like that. Is that an option? Does that exist today, or are people interested in providing those types of services? Is the project, it sounds like it's deployed in enough places that it might be, might be worthwhile for someone to actually offer paid support.
Yep. So there is the founder of the project, Larry. He runs a company called Cake Development Corporation, and what they do is they do exactly that. They do client support, and they take on client development jobs, and they do kind of support and consultation for building Cake apps.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like also, I mean, it's such a big community. You guys actually have a conference going, or I don't know if it's an annual. I don't know how long it's been running, but I love the name, Cake Fest. That's an awesome name. Do you ever get people showing up with forks, where's the cake?
We actually, so one of the fun things about the conference is we always get cakes that look like the project's logo. So we always have these, it's a fun meta joke. And there's all the things around the project are all baking flavored, the command line, the code generation tool is called bake. So you type and the command line tool is called cake. So you type cake, bake, and then it's kind of a fun joke. And the news site is called the bakery. Documentation is called the cookbook. So there's a lot of bacon jokes in the project. But yeah, we have a conference. It's almost every year since 2008, I think. And we do it in different locations each year. I don't know where it's going to go this year. I'm not involved with the event planning part of it. A guy named Graham Weldon does that. So we're talking about a couple different venues. So hopefully this fall there'll be another one.
Great. How many people were there at the last one?
The last one, we had about, I think it was 80 people. 80 people went to the last one. That was in Manchester, England.
So that's pretty good. I mean, because that's fairly, I always wonder about the events in England, how many people they're actually going to get. Because, you get the local people, of course, but then, everybody else has to travel quite a bit. So I think 80 people actually is pretty good.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with the turnout. We did one in Chicago 3 years ago, and there were around 100 people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been pretty good turnout, I think.
Yeah, cool. What are some of the recent developments? This is really a two-part question. Like, what are some of the things that people may not realize have come out recently? Some of the new features, and then, where are you going from here? So, what kind of things can we expect in the future?
Sure. So we've been working on the 2.0 series that came out in October 2010, and since then we've done 4 kind of backwards compatible feature releases. And so we're actually in the middle of building 2.4. 2.3 came out in January, and so I don't think there were any like huge new features in 2.3, but there's been a bunch of small stuff. I should probably pull out the migration guide. That doesn't sound like a stooge. So I can actually tell you what we've been doing. Yeah, we've been doing a whole bunch of kind of backwards compatible feature releases, which has been kind of a great thing for the community because we can say you can safely upgrade and you get some new stuff. So that's really nice. And then we're also working on Cake 3, which is we're kind of breaking a lot of backwards compatibility. So certain parts of Cake have been backwards compatible for about 8 years, which is a long time to be backwards compatible. I think a really long time. And so the database kind of model layer has it's gotten a little long in the tooth and kind of outdated for what people need to do these days. So when we move to Cake 3, we're switching to PHP 5.4, and then we're going to be kind of supporting some of the community standards. You asked earlier about how do all the frameworks get together and kind of agree on things, and they do to some extent with a lot of bickering, and that's called the PHP Framework Interoperability Group, of which Cake is a part of. And so they kind of agree on auto-loading systems and kind of coding standards. And so we're part of that, and so we'll be adopting the first 2 PSR recommendations, the 0, which is the auto-loading system, and then PSR 1, which is file naming and method naming. And so we're adopting those as part of Cake 3 and moving to 5.4, rebuilding the model layer and database APIs to kind of give more flexibility and kind of fix a lot of the problems that have kind of grown. When you have a subsystem stay backwards compatible for 8 years and get things bolted onto it, it kind of grows and turns into this thing. I don't really know how to express what it's turned into.
But I mean, is that the major driver for making this break? Is like, okay, we're just at this point where we've just got to change these things or simplify this part, and it's just gonna, the old stuff just isn't gonna work with it anymore.
That's part of it, and part of it is a community request. People have been requesting. So the database layer in Cake returns arrays, which some people really like and some people really hate. So we're going to go with the people that hate it, and we're going to switch it into an object-based system so that it's going to return instances of models. Because right now the models kind of act as like a table gateway kind of interface, if you're familiar with those kind of design patterns. And so people want it to return more like instances and collections. So that's where the big break is coming from.
Is that going to be a performance boost to do it that way? It sounds like it might be.
It will probably not be a performance boost.
Okay.
Object construction in PHP is relatively expensive, and so if you, we're going to have to experiment with lazily creating object instances, so that if you pull up a result set of 1,000 rows, that you don't have to create 15,000 objects, because that's going to be a huge memory sink. So we're looking into ways that we can like lazily instantiate objects. We haven't actually gotten that far. Myself and one of the other guys are actually writing really low-level database abstraction right now, just giving like query builders and making that query building system kind of flexible in what we want versus before we start on the actual model layer.
Right, right. So when can we look forward to that? Is that something?
I have no idea.
Okay, so you don't even know. So it's.
I wish I knew.
I just wanted to make sure, if it was right around the corner, it didn't sound like it was, but if it was, then people could be on the lookout for it. But if it's 6 months, a year down the road, maybe who knows then.
I'm definitely going to put it at least 6 years. So that's for like what's happened recently.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of like small improvements. So 2.3 is like added new methods into request handling. We've kind of simplified some APIs for setting file responses. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll do a web request, do some database calls, and generate a PDF. So we're trying to make those types of things easier. Some new functions around the plugin system. So Cake has a plugin system that allows you to build like either small applications that you kind of bolt onto your application or use common libraries. And so we're making that system a little bit more full-fledged and kind of fix it up. Also some stuff in the form helper, making, disabled input generation a lot more flexible. Lots of little stuff, like nothing that's going to be like mind-blowing, but it's all, the little things that help.
Yeah.
I think.
You mentioned the PDF thing. I was on a site just yesterday. I spend a lot of time making things and tinkering and things like that. And so one of the sites that I enjoy is Evil Mad Scientist, because they have a lot of, kind of low level, here's how you build this, or here's how you do this. And so it's a good place to get started on some projects sometimes. And I really like the way that they generate, if you're reading an article, you can hit a button to generate a PDF of that article, which sometimes is easier for me to do that than it is to, so I'll generate the PDF and save it in Google Drive or something, and then I'll come back to it later on a tablet or a phone and just pull up the PDF because the formatting's all there and everything's just the way I want it. But it's a really nice system because they say, okay, you can get rid of all images. Like before it generates the PDF, it comes back with a preview and asks you, do you want to get rid of all images? Do you want to change the font? Do you want to do whatever? And then you save it as a PDF.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really neat. So, I mean, is that the type of thing that people can do with that feature about the PDFs?
Yeah, you could build that. The PDF output support is not actually built into Cake. It's a community plugin, but the guy who does the PDF plugin is actually one of the core contributors, so he wanted like an easier way to integrate his plugin into the framework and make it easier for people that are using that kind of plugin to kind of get the files out to the browser.
Cool.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up too was kind of a trend in this area, which is moving to a single page kind of a view of the world as opposed to multiple pages, having multiple pages. So how does that fit in with where CakePHP is and where it's going? Is that a trend that you see becoming more and more popular? Are you going to have to adapt to that?
Yeah, that's definitely something that's becoming more and more popular for sure. Like client-side frameworks like Backbone and Ember.js are becoming really popular for good reason too. They give really nice user experiences, really fast, really responsive. And so the way I see server-side frameworks like Cake integrating into that new world is by being able to provide kind of pages that aren't really pages. So being able to provide responses that are in JSON or XML and doing that really effortlessly and making that really simple for developers to switch over and output in multiple formats. So make a JSON API. So you can hook that into an Ember or a Backbone application. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on as well. Like during the 2.x development, we introduced new special view classes that generate JSON and generate XML. And those are the two most common types of data interchange for client-side applications. Cool. So I think the role is going to be making it really easy to get the data out of your server side and into your client-side application. Right. And that's going to be.
And is that something that so that's something that CakePHP could do better than those other frameworks? It sounds like. I mean, that's one of the drawbacks of the other frameworks is the data interaction and things like that.
I'm sure they haven't. I think the system we've built in Cake is really quite simple. There's not a lot of configuration. Like it's all convention based. So if you have a MIME type that maps to the JSON, we call it the JSON. It's a name for the MIME type. So if you do a request that does accept application JSON, what we'll do is if you've got this kind of component enabled, is it'll find the view class and then make your controller use that view class and then look for special variables on how you want to render like a data UI, a data view is what we call them. So it'll look for this special _serialize, and that tells it which view variables to serialize and how to serialize them. And so I think it's a pretty elegant system, and it's totally pluggable by end users, so they can plug in like their own custom types, or if they want to make their own JSON view output, they can do that as well.
Yeah, I just started taking the Udacity course. They're offering one right now on building HTML5 games. And so it's quite interesting. But where they have to start is with JavaScript and JSON interaction. And so I'm just learning about it. I could actually understand some of what you were just talking about and why it's important. So so it's interesting that the JSON interaction, I think, is really, really interesting in terms of going forward and staying relevant to what's going on in the rest of the space. So that's really cool. Yeah. Interestingly enough, when you sent me some information, kind of a little background, you're actually a designer by background. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I went to art school. Fun story. I went to the Ontario College of Art and Design, and I took illustration and painting. It was what my undergraduate degree is in, and yeah, it turns out you can't make money doing that, just like my parents told me. So, anyways, I graduated from college, couldn't make any money, and I'd always had like a burgeoning interest in computers. Fool around with computer animation at some point, and so yeah, I figured I know some design, I know typography, I can probably translate that into like a web design job, and so I did. And then I found out that you can make a lot more money and take on a lot more interesting work as a programmer. So then I kind of learned how to program, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
That's funny because my wife has a degree in philosophy, a master's in philosophy, and similar situation. Like, what do you do with it? Yeah. Well, nothing. I don't know. Sometimes you get a job, but maybe teaching.
Sometimes, yeah. Some people do. Some of the people I graduated with got jobs doing illustration and artwork, but sure. I did not. Now I'm a programmer.
Yeah. But do you feel like that helps? I mean, because I think that's actually, I mean, something for any of people that are in college now or at university. It's important for them to understand that actually happens quite a bit. Some people get frustrated because they have a degree in something, and then they go on to do something completely different. And so for a while, it's like, wow, what am I doing? But that's okay. A lot of people end up like that. I mean, my degree was in communications, and I did a lot of theater in college, and then I got interested in computers, and now I work in IT. So, I don't know. I always try to, whenever I talk to people that are either considering going to college or high school students or people in college, I'm like, if you change your major, it's fine. It happens. If you don't end up doing what your degree's in, it's okay. You'll find a way to make that degree fit into whatever you're doing. All that learning that you got will not go to waste. Do you find that yourself as since you have a design background? Is it when it comes to the design aspect of making sure that the programming is done in a way that makes it easier for designers to contribute what they have? I mean, do you find that helps at all with what you're doing now?
Yeah, I find that so art school, a lot of it is just about being creative and thinking about problems kind of creatively. A lot of it is also like actual painting technique and drawing technique that I don't get to use very much unless I'm working on like a front-end project where I can actually, do the design work and build out the whole UI and do all of that. But I find the creativity aspects are actually really well, like if you're a creative person, programming works really well because it is a really creative kind of field. Like you get to create things that have never existed before and solve problems, sometimes very creatively, I find, yeah.
That's really cool. So, if I wanted to get started with CakePHP today, do you have any type of tutorials or content out there for people who are just getting going and don't know a whole lot about it?
Yep. So actually there's the first page of the documentation. So if you go to the book.cakephp.org, the very first page actually has a getting started guide. And it's the third title. And then there's a blog tutorial. So the quintessential, basic blog. Put some posts in it.
Yeah, I was looking through your community links, and I saw stuff called Bakery, which, by the way, is a really cute name, and CakePHP TV. So what exactly is this? Because I'm looking at this content, and it looks like there's a lot of really cool stuff here.
So CakePHP TV was something that one of the guys wanted to try and start, and it's basically a community video tutorial site. And so we posted some videos. He posted some videos from the conferences, and then some other people posted videos of like how to do things. Yeah, it's pretty good for beginners. Yeah, it would be quite useful. It's a lot of like video tutorials and like explaining how things work and following kind of like a code, someone developing a feature.
Are people doing like good jobs of keeping this stuff updated? I mean, is some of it newer than other content? How is it all managed? I mean, is it all community managed, or are people who are full-time developing the project also contributing?
It's full-time community managed, so the up-to-dateness isn't always 100%. Unfortunately, when you're not paying people, it's really hard to make them do work. That's something I've learned.
And everybody's always so scared of videos too. The second you have to get on camera and start talking, even if it's to a screencast, that's pretty scary.
It's a lot of time investment as well. Like building a screencast is actually really hard. I tried it once and I was like, man, this is really hard. It would give me a lot of appreciation for a well-executed screencast. Like that's a serious amount of work.
That actually used to be what I did. So I completely get behind this 100%. People don't understand how many hours go into like a 5-minute video.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Totally unbelievable.
Yeah, which is why we have people like John helping us out behind the scenes over here. It makes our lives a lot easier for sure.
Yeah, working the magic.
Exactly. So another thing I wanted to point out, just in looking at this, is I like your blog too. I mean, you have a lot of good talking about learning about things. I mean, you share your experiences in learning about new, whether it's a jQuery, a new feature in jQuery that you just learned about or whatever. The blog itself is very interesting. I find it's not fluff at all, which is nice. You actually talk about your experiences with that. Are there anything? I just looked at the first page. I mean, is there anything else that you blog about besides writing code?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, it's mostly all code. If it's non-code things, I usually leave that to Twitter. I try and keep the blog kind of like learning things I've learned and kind of experiences with technology and like kind of sharing things I've learned and kind of also kind of a teaching thing.
Right.
Kind of teaching people what I've learned and how not to screw up like I have.
Yeah. No, I like that aspect of it. And I was kind of just reading through and I'm like, oh, I really like this. I mean, that's the kind of blog that I enjoy reading. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in coding or certainly anything around the whole PHP framework and the interaction between the various layers and things. It's a good blog to follow, definitely. I would highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So a couple questions. We're just about out of time, and a couple questions we have to ask, otherwise Randall gets upset with us. So the first one is, do you have a favorite scripting language?
Yeah, I do. It's JavaScript.
Okay, so there you go.
It's a horrible language, but I love it.
That is what I find more and more as I start to delve into this, because I'm more, I know Perl, I know a little bit of Python, tiny bit of Java, and then when I started learning a little bit more JavaScript for this class I'm taking, I'm like, ugh, I really don't like this as much.
It's a weird Frankenstein monster of a language.
It's a love-hate relationship, really, it seems like. I mean, people, they're passionate about it, they do it, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, it's not very pretty.
That's totally how I feel about JavaScript. I love it. It's fantastic, but it's also really horrible at the same time. Yeah.
And then the other question I have to ask is your favorite text editor.
Vim.
Ah, yes.
I was coming from a design background, I was not big on, Vim or command line at all. And so I started off in Eclipse, and Eclipse got slow, and I switched to TextMate. And then I started having to work on remote systems all the time. And I had to learn like a command line editor because I was SSH'd in some box somewhere else on the planet. And so I had to learn like Nano or Pico or, Vim or Emacs. And so I had to, tear the Band-Aid off and just learn Vim. So now my brain's broken, it's infected with Vim, and that's all I can do.
I know, I find myself, I do use gedit more and more. I don't know, it's just convenient. It's usually there. And even though I always have a terminal window open, I find myself in a GUI, all the time. So I've started using gedit more and more. But then sometimes in gedit, I'll start to do Vim commands, and it just doesn't work. So just by habit, just by force of habit, I'm like, oh, I want to insert something here, and then forget it.
Yeah, you've got Vimitis.
Yeah, exactly. You've been infected.
I can't count how many times I've tried to close an email with WQ.
Yes, exactly. Or especially when you don't want the email around, right? You do WQ exclamation point, and it's like, oh, I just wrote WQ exclamation point to somebody.
I had that problem for a while too when I switched over to Kate, because I was using Kate and KDE for a while, which is amazing. But if you're a Vim user, it's just like trying to use those keyboard shortcuts for everything, and all of a sudden I have like :Ws in my code, and things are not compiling.
Then you have to write a script to go out and strip out all the :Ws.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bash script. So one more question I just thought of while we were talking, and that is, and I promised I would do this. A couple weeks ago, I was talking to Zotonic, the guys from Zotonic. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they wrote a web framework, and it's also a content management system in Erlang. And so if you're not familiar with it, you probably won't be able to answer this question, but they were very adamant about the fact that because Erlang is asynchronous, it does things asynchronously, that it was really, really, really fast, and they could outperform any PHP system, you know, because they can process things asynchronously. I was just, so if you're not familiar with it, maybe you won't be able to answer this, but I told them I would definitely ask you to give a response to them on this. You know, can CakePHP compete with something built on an Erlang framework?
I have no idea, but I do know that you should never trust any benchmark that you didn't make yourself.
That's right, and nobody else should either, which lends a little bit of a problem there because no one's trusting anybody.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with web frameworks built in Erlang. I know that the only real Erlang project I've really used is RabbitMQ, and it's amazing. So yeah, I don't know how a web framework built in Erlang. I bet it would be good. It's Erlang, so.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was very interesting. It was kind of a different project, and like that was, I think that was, you know, in response to my question about, well, why did you get started on this? I think that's what they said was, well, PHP was too slow. We couldn't make things work, and so we started in Erlang, and I thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting way to get going. But
it's interesting, yeah. The way most people solve that problem in PHP is just buy more web servers.
Right.
Right. Just get more of them.
They're pretty cheap, so yeah, just throw a couple more in there, and you don't have to change anything.
Yep.
So
that's or you do what Facebook did and just compile it all to C++ and then go that way.
There you go. Great. Well, Mark, I want to thank you. Any last words for the listeners? Anything you want to mention or drop off for anybody that might be interested in CakePHP?
No, I don't really have anything. If you're interested in CakePHP, you should definitely go by the website and download it and go through the tutorials. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good discussion and great to have you on. So that was Mark's story with CakePHP. Very interesting. Randy, what do you think?
I thought it was really cool. I mean, I'm more focused on the documentation and community parts of all these projects out there, and the documentation from what I saw looked amazing, and I loved the videos, and I love the community interaction. You can never get enough people working on these things as far as tutorials and getting documentation updated, and hearing they have that much of a following, it's really good for the project. I mean, it can only benefit them.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of interest, and so it's really good to hear about. I agree. I mean, it's really hard to get started on a project where there's little to no documentation. Some people are reluctant to go to IRC to ask questions. I know I am, just because I feel like I'm such a noob. You know, it's like, oh, these people aren't going to, you know, if I ask them how to do this simple thing that, you know, everybody should know, they're going to get upset with me, and so I typically won't go to IRC unless I feel like I'm very confident in what the question I'm asking isn't going to be, you know, laughed at. So that type of documentation is really, really important, especially for new users and even experienced users. Having examples of some of the things that are more frequently asked questions, not just an answer, yes, you can do it, but here's how to do it. Can really make a big difference, and it's good to hear that they're large enough they can actually have some conferences and there's enough interest that people can actually get together as a community, not just virtually but in person as well, to talk out some of these issues and find out how to do things and learn about how to get started. So I agree, it's very, very important.
Oh yeah, I like the idea of the whole user conference. I mean, there aren't many projects that can pull off something like that. And 80 people, that's a lot. That's bigger than a lot of user groups out there. I mean, that would be pretty cool. And yeah, I kind of wonder how many of them traveled for that, or if they're located around that area. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, when they were in Chicago, they had 100 people, and I'm guessing those were mostly people from the U.S. So yeah, I mean, maybe they'll have, depending on where their user base is, maybe they'll have one in some other exotic location next time, maybe in Japan. I think he said there's a lot of users in Japan, and so that would be kind of interesting. Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, so talking about things that are really interesting, we need to mention some upcoming guests that we're going to be having on FLOSS Weekly. So big news, next week, Randall will be back from all of his traveling, so I know everyone's excited to have Randall back and pointing at the TV and wearing his fez and all that. So he will be back next week to talk about Poodle. I think we actually had Poodle, not the dog, P-O-O-T-L-E. We had them on the schedule for back in November, December or something, and there was a problem. So anyway, they're going to be, finally, we're going to get them on next week. Poodle is a web portal that handles translating documents, translating all kinds of things. And so it's basically a web portal. You submit the document, and I think it automatically handles most of the translation for you. So it also does things like if you have a team of translators, it can handle assigning the various tasks to various people depending on the language and things like that. So it should be very interesting. And then the week after that, we're talking about Dart. Now this is one that I'm really interested in. As I mentioned, I'm taking this class on HTML5, developing games at HTML5 on Udacity. Very, very interesting. And Dart is a web programming language developed by Google to, first it was intended to replace JavaScript, and now I think maybe they work a little bit more side by side. I don't know. We'll have to ask the developers. But you know, Dart was kind of created because JavaScript has this sort of it's ugly kind of thing about it, but a lot of people really like to use it, and so they developed Dart, and they'll be talking about Dart. So we'll get some folks on to talk about that. The week after that, on March 27th, we're going to have a project called Pinto. Pinto is a suite of tools and libraries for creating and managing custom CPAN-like a repository of Perl modules. So I know this is something that Randall will certainly be interested in talking about, obviously. I don't know who's going to be co-hosting that day, but I bet it'll be hard for them to get a word in edgewise on this. But basically,
I'm going to request that one. That one sounds awesome.
Yeah, so if you use Perl, you know it can be quite difficult, actually, because CPAN, you know, it's kind of a global resource, basically, for modules. And sometimes you need a custom version of a module or a module that is at a certain level in order to get your applications to work. And you want to maintain your own repository of those modules, or perhaps your own modules that you've built for your Perl scripts that are running in your environment. And Pinto does that for you. It's basically your own CPAN on your own network. You know, maybe you're in an environment where you can't always go out to the internet. Maybe the internet is blocked off to the servers that you are using that need to go out and try to find these modules. I know that was something that I dealt with in one of my jobs, and I had to actually compile Perl into an executable or a binary file because of that limitation. So anyway, that's Pinto. So if you're a Perl person and you have that need in your environment, definitely check out Pinto on March 27th. So that's enough plugging for upcoming shows. Randy, where can people find out more about what you're involved with and what you're doing?
So the big thing for me is my Twitter account, and I actually am making an announcement on my Twitter account tonight about a new project that I'm working on. Ooh. So not really open source, but if you're into video games and you like females, then you should watch my Twitter tonight, because I'm really excited about this, just not quite ready to talk about it yet.
So I don't know from that description, but it sounds like every guy on the planet should be interested. If you like video games and you like females, I mean, that's pretty much you know, most of the male population. So
that's what I'm hoping. So we'll see how this goes. Yeah, I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet, but it's going to be really awesome. So watch my Twitter. My handle is FreeBSDGirl. You can see it there on the screen.
Great. Awesome. So definitely check that out. As far as I'm concerned, you can follow all the stuff that I'm doing on Google+. That's the best place to follow all the different things that I talk about. I talk a lot about Raspberry Pi and making things and projects and open source and Linux. So if you want to you know, kind of follow what I'm doing and have a conversation, that's the best thing about Google+, is that I can actually interact a lot more easily on Google+ than I can some of the other networks. Definitely follow me there. I'm at Aaron Newcomb on all the social networks, including Facebook and Twitter as well. So if that's your thing, you can follow what I'm doing there as well. So definitely keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the Twit network as well. If you're watching live, I'll be on Twig, I believe, a little bit later on today, This Week in Google, coming up later. So definitely check that out a little bit later today as well. As far as this show goes, you can follow us on Twitter, Identica. We're at Floss Weekly there. Plus Floss Weekly, of course, is the convention on Google+. And all the shows get announced there, except for this one, which I forgot to do. So I'll put a little recap there in just a minute. You can also follow the conversation that's happening live in IRC if you go to irc.twit.tv, and you can watch the show live, of course, at live.twit.tv. So that'll wrap it up for this edition of Floss Weekly. Next week, Randall will be back, and he'll point at the screen and say what he always does. Join us next week for Floss Weekly.